Man dies in accident, sees secrets about Earth's leaders, shocking NDE. It was a typical Tuesday morning when David strapped on his helmet and hopped onto his motorcycle. The sun was bright, the sky cloudless, and the hum of the city around him was a comforting backdrop. For David, the ride to work was his favorite part of the day, a brief escape from the monotony of office life. He loved the freedom of the open road, the wind rushing past as he weaved through traffic. Today felt no different, and as he sped along the highway, he thought about the meeting he had later and the weekend plans he was making with his friends. He didn't see the truck until it was too late. It came out of nowhere, its driver distracted for just a moment, but that moment was all it took. The collision was sudden and violent, metal twisting and glass shattering in a cacophony of chaos. David felt the world spin around him, his body flung from the bike like a rag doll. Then silence. When David opened his eyes, he wasn't lying on the asphalt or surrounded by the wreckage. Instead, he found himself standing in a vast, empty space. The ground beneath him shimmered like liquid silver, and the air was thick with an energy that made his skin tingle. He was aware of himself in a way that was almost disorienting, as though every part of his being was both magnified and weightless. "Where am I?" he said aloud, his voice echoing strangely in the stillness. "You are no longer bound by the physical," a voice replied, deep and resonant. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. David turned, but there was no one there. The space remained empty, though the voice continued. "You are in the place between." "The place between what?" David asked, his voice trembling. "Between life and what lies beyond," the voice answered. "You are here to see what has been hidden, to understand what you could not before." As the voice spoke, the shimmering space around David began to change. Shapes emerged from the silvery ground, forming into what looked like pillars of light. They rose high into the infinite expanse, each one glowing with an intensity that made it difficult to look directly at them. Between the pillars, threads of energy crisscrossed, forming an intricate web that pulsed with life. "What is this?" David asked, taking a hesitant step forward. "This is the framework of your world," the voice replied. "The web of influence that connects all things. Each thread represents a decision, a power, a force shaping the reality you once knew." David's heart raced as he stepped closer to the web. The threads seemed to hum faintly, their energy vibrating in the air around him. He reached out to touch one, and the moment his fingers brushed it, a vision erupted before him. He was no longer in the empty expanse but in a grand, dimly lit room. The walls were lined with shelves of ancient books, their spines cracked and worn. At the center of the room stood a long table, around which sat a group of individuals. They were dressed in elegant, tailored suits, their faces partially obscured by the shadows cast by a single flickering chandelier. David watched as one of them, a man with piercing eyes and a commanding presence, leaned forward and spoke. His voice was calm but carried an unmistakable weight of authority. "The decisions we make here ripple through every corner of the globe," the man said. "The balance of power, the flow of resources, the direction of progress, it all begins with us." The others nodded, their faces expressionless. David felt a chill run through him as he realized what he was witnessing. These were not ordinary leaders or officials. The power they wielded was absolute, their influence stretching far beyond what the public could ever imagine. The vision shifted, showing the group making decisions that seemed small on the surface, approving a trade deal, redirecting funds, implementing new policies. But as David watched, he saw the ripples of those decisions spreading outward, touching millions of lives in ways that were invisible yet profound. He saw the rise and fall of economies, the outbreak of conflicts, and the manipulation of narratives that shaped public perception. "This is the unseen hand," the voice said, breaking through David's thoughts. "The forces that guide your world, hidden from view but omnipresent in their reach." David felt a wave of anger and helplessness wash over him. He thought of the countless people whose lives were shaped by these decisions, unaware of the forces at play. "Why are you showing me this?" he demanded. "What can I do about it?" "To understand is the first step," the voice replied. "But you are not here merely to witness. You are here to see the truths that lie beneath the surface, to grasp the depth of the connections that shape your existence. The vision shifted again, pulling David into a new scene. This time, he was in a bustling city square, surrounded by people going about their lives. He noticed something strange, threads of light extending from each person, weaving together in a complex web that connected them all. Some threads were bright and steady, while others flickered weakly, their light dimmed by shadows. "This is the interconnectedness of life," the voice said. "Every action, every decision, creates a ripple that affects the whole." The leaders you saw manipulate these threads, shaping the web to serve their purposes. David's gaze followed one particularly bright thread, watching as it touched the threads of others around it, strengthening them and spreading light. But he also saw threads that were tangled and dark, their shadows spreading like a sickness through the web. He felt a deep sense of unease as he realized how fragile the balance was, how easily the light could be consumed by the encroaching darkness. "Is it always like this?" David asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Is there no way to stop the shadows from spreading?" "The web is dynamic," the voice replied. "It is shaped by the choices of all who are connected to it. Those in power may guide its direction, but every thread carries the potential to influence the whole." David felt a spark of hope flicker within him. He thought of the people he had seen in the square, how their actions and connections had the power to strengthen the light. He realized that even the smallest choices could create ripples, that the web was not solely the domain of the powerful. As the vision began to fade, David found himself back in the shimmering expanse, the pillars of light and threads of energy surrounding him once more. He felt a new determination growing within him, a resolve to understand the web more deeply and to find a way to strengthen the light against the encroaching shadows. The voice remained silent, leaving him alone with his thoughts as he prepared to take the next step on his journey. David stood motionless in the shimmering expanse, the vision of the web and the leaders still vivid in his mind. The threads of energy around him pulsed faintly, as if mirroring his own racing thoughts. He couldn't shake the unease he felt at what he had just witnessed, the unseen hands shaping the world in ways most people would never know. His mind buzzed with questions, but before he could speak, the space around him began to shift again. The threads reconfigured, forming intricate patterns that seemed to guide him forward. As he took a hesitant step, a new thread caught his attention. This one glowed brightly, but its light was uneven, as though it had been disrupted. When David touched it, another vision unfolded before him, pulling him into a new scene. He was in a sterile, brightly lit boardroom high above a sprawling metropolis. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city below, but the atmosphere inside the room was cold and tense. Around the table sat a group of individuals, each exuding an air of authority and confidence. Their voices were calm but calculated as they discussed matters that, on the surface, seemed mundane: budgets, policies, projections. But as David listened, he realized the implications of their decisions stretched far beyond the confines of the room. "We've identified the regions most susceptible to economic influence," one man said, sliding a document across the table. "Redirecting resources here will yield the most control over local markets." A woman to his left nodded, her expression unreadable. "We need to ensure the public perceives these changes as progress. The narrative will be key." David's stomach churned as he watched the discussion unfold. The decisions they made were not about solving problems or helping people, they were about consolidating power, shaping economies and perceptions to serve their own interests. He saw how their words translated into actions that would ripple through communities, affecting millions of lives without their knowledge or consent. "Why do they do this?" David asked aloud, though he knew no one in the vision could hear him. Why manipulate and control when they could use their power for good? The voice that had guided him before returned, calm and steady. Power, when unchecked, often serves itself. These individuals believe they act in the best interest of progress, but their view is narrow, their intentions clouded by greed and fear. As the vision continued, David's focus shifted to the threads of energy that extended from each person in the room. Unlike the vibrant, interconnected web he had seen earlier, these threads were rigid and dark, tangled with shadows that spread outward like cracks in glass. The threads touched those of others, employees, citizens, entire communities, and dimmed their light, creating a ripple effect of disconnection and despair. David's chest tightened as he watched. He thought of the people affected by these decisions, their lives upended by forces they didn't even know existed. The weight of it was overwhelming, but he also felt a spark of determination. He needed to understand more, to see the full scope of what was happening and why. The scene shifted again, pulling David into a bustling newsroom. Journalists worked feverishly at their desks, phones ringing and keyboards clacking as they scrambled to meet deadlines. At the center of the room, a tall man in a crisp suit stood with his arms crossed, surveying the chaos with a satisfied expression. David recognized him from the earlier vision, one of the individuals at the table. "Remember, we control the narrative," the man said, his voice commanding. "Frame the story to align with the agenda. We need the public to trust us." David's jaw tightened as he realized what he was witnessing. The media wasn't just reporting events, it was being used as a tool to shape public opinion, to manipulate the narrative in ways that served those in power. He watched as headlines were drafted, carefully worded to evoke specific emotions and guide the thoughts of those who would read them. The threads of energy extending from the newsroom glowed faintly but were entwined with the dark shadows that had permeated the earlier vision. "What can ordinary people do against this?" David asked, his voice filled with frustration. "If the truth is hidden, how can they fight back?" "The truth is not hidden," the voice replied. "It is obscured, but it can be revealed. Every individual has the power to seek, to question, and to act. The web is vast, but no single thread is insignificant." David let the words sink in as the vision shifted again. This time, he found himself in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Children played in the yards, neighbors greeted each other warmly, and the air was filled with a sense of peace. But as David looked closer, he saw threads of energy extending from each person, weaving into the larger web he had seen before. Some threads glowed brightly, their light spreading warmth and connection. Others were faint, weighed down by the shadows that clung to them. A man sitting on a porch caught David's attention. His thread was dim, frayed at the edges, and surrounded by a haze of shadow. David stepped closer, observing as the man stared blankly into the distance, his shoulders slumped. It was clear he felt disconnected, isolated from the world around him. David could see how the shadows in his thread reached out, touching those of his family and neighbors, dimming their light as well. "This is the effect of disconnection," the voice said. "When individuals lose sight of their own light, the shadows spread, weakening the web." David felt a pang of sadness as he watched the man. He wanted to reach out, to help him strengthen his light, but he didn't know how. "How do you stop the shadows from spreading?" he asked. "Connection," the voice replied. "Every act of kindness, every choice to engage with love and compassion, strengthens the threads. The shadows cannot hold against the light." The scene shifted once more, pulling David back into the shimmering expanse. He was surrounded again by the intricate web of energy, its threads pulsing faintly. He could see the balance of light and shadow more clearly now, the way every thread contributed to the whole. The vision had given him a deeper understanding of the forces at play, but he still felt the weight of what he had seen. The leaders, the media, the disconnection, how does it all fit together? He asked, turning toward the voice. "The web is shaped by every thread," the voice said. "The choices of those in power ripple outward, but so do the choices of every individual. You have seen the forces that shape your world, but the power to strengthen the light lies within each thread." David's mind raced as he tried to piece everything together. He thought of the leaders in the boardroom, the journalists crafting narratives, and the ordinary people whose lives were affected by forces they couldn't see. The web was vast, but he understood now that it wasn't immutable. Every thread, no matter how small, had the potential to influence the whole. As the threads around him pulsed brighter, David felt a renewed sense of purpose. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he was ready to take the next step, to learn more about the web and how to strengthen the light within it. With each step forward, he carried the weight of what he had seen, determined to make a difference in the intricate tapestry of existence. David stood in the shimmering expanse, his mind racing with the revelations he had witnessed. The threads of energy around him pulsed faintly, their light weaving together in patterns too intricate for him to fully comprehend. Each thread carried a story, a purpose, a connection. He understood now that every choice, every action, had consequences far beyond what could be seen. But the weight of what he had learned also left him with a deep sense of unease. If the web was so vast, how could any one person hope to make a difference? Before he could dwell on the thought, the threads around him began to shift, drawing him toward another point of focus. A single thread caught his attention, glowing faintly but with a steady rhythm. When he touched it, another vision unfolded, pulling him into a new scene. This time, David was in a massive control room filled with glowing monitors and sleek consoles. The air buzzed with energy as technicians and analysts moved about, their eyes glued to screens displaying streams of data. The walls were lined with maps of the world, each one dotted with blinking lights that seemed to represent major cities or regions. At the center of the room stood a tall, imposing figure, their presence commanding attention. "This is the nexus of influence," the voice said, breaking the silence. "From here, decisions are made that affect the lives of billions. Information flows through this space, but not all of it is shared. Much is held, altered, or hidden." David watched as the figure in the center gestured toward one of the monitors. The screen displayed a news broadcast, the anchor reporting on an unfolding crisis. But as David focused on the screen, he saw discrepancies. A set of instructions appeared in a small corner of the monitor, guiding how the story should be framed. Analysts worked quickly to adjust the narrative, their actions deliberate and precise. "They control what is seen and what is not," the voice continued. "The information presented to the public is carefully curated, designed to guide thought and action in specific ways." David's stomach churned as he watched. He thought of the countless people who relied on this information to understand the world, unaware of the hidden hands shaping their perceptions. He felt a growing anger at the manipulation, at the way truth was twisted to serve agendas. The vision shifted, showing the ripple effects of the altered narrative. Communities responded to the crisis with fear and division, their threads dimming as distrust spread through the web. Meanwhile, those in power used the chaos to implement policies and consolidate control, their own threads glowing brighter as they fed off the shadows they had sown. "How can people fight back if they don't even know what's happening?" David asked, his voice heavy with frustration. "The first step is awareness," the voice replied. "The web is vast, but it is not impenetrable. The light of truth can pierce even the deepest shadows. Those who seek knowledge, who question and connect, can strengthen the web and push back against the darkness." As the vision continued, David's focus shifted to one of the analysts in the room. Unlike the others, their movements were hesitant, their gaze flickering toward a hidden folder on their screen. David could see their thread trembling, as though caught between two forces, fear and resolve. After a moment of hesitation, the analyst clicked on the folder, revealing documents that contradicted the narrative being crafted. Their thread glowed more brightly as they copied the files onto a hidden drive. The vision followed the analyst as they left the control room, carrying the truth with them. Though their journey was fraught with challenges and danger, their actions created ripples of light in the web. The information they shared began to spread, reaching those who could act on it, those who could amplify it. The shadows around the web receded slightly, the light growing stronger as connections were mended and trust was rebuilt. David felt a spark of hope as the vision faded. He understood now that even in the face of overwhelming power, individual choices could create meaningful change. The web was not static, it was alive, shaped by every action and decision. The threads around him pulsed again, drawing his attention to another. This one glowed more brightly, its light steady and strong. When he touched it, he was pulled into another scene, this time in a quiet rural village. The air was filled with the sound of children playing, and the scent of fresh earth and blooming flowers lingered in the breeze. At the center of the village, a group of elders sat in a circle, their threads glowing brightly as they spoke. "These are the keepers of wisdom," the voice said. "Their light comes not from power or influence but from their deep connection to the web and to one another. They understand the importance of balance, of nurturing the threads that bind their community together." David watched as the elders discussed ways to resolve a dispute among the villagers. Their approach was deliberate and compassionate, focused on healing and unity rather than division. He could see how their actions strengthened the threads of those around them, creating ripples of light that extended far beyond the village. "This is what the web needs," the voice said. "Connection, understanding, and care. The light of one thread can illuminate many, creating a cascade that strengthens the whole." As the vision continued, David saw how the villagers came together, their collective light growing brighter as they worked to support one another. The elders' influence was subtle but profound, guiding the community toward harmony without imposing control. It was a stark contrast to the manipulation he had seen in the earlier visions, a reminder that power could be used for good as well as harm. When the vision faded, David found himself back in the shimmering expanse. The threads around him pulsed with renewed energy, their light weaving into patterns that seemed to reflect the lessons he had learned. He thought of the control room, the analyst who had chosen courage over fear, and the elders who had nurtured their community with wisdom and compassion. Each vision had shown him a different aspect of the web, a different way in which light and shadow could shape the world. "The web is vast," the voice said, its tone steady and calm. "But it is not beyond repair. Each thread, no matter how small, has the power to influence the whole. The choices you make, the connections you nurture, will determine the strength of the light." David nodded, his resolve growing. He understood now that the web was not something distant or abstract. It was a reflection of the world he had known, a mirror of the choices made by every individual. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he was ready to face it with open eyes and an open heart. The threads around him pulsed brighter, guiding him toward the next part of his journey. The threads around David pulsed rhythmically, their intricate patterns shifting like the currents of a vast, unseen ocean. Each thread hummed faintly, alive with the energy of countless lives and choices. David felt a deeper pull now, an unshakable determination to uncover more truths. The voice that had guided him earlier had fallen silent, leaving him to walk alone through the shimmering expanse. Yet he felt far from isolated. The threads seemed to resonate with his thoughts, responding to the questions forming in his mind. Another thread caught his attention, glowing faintly but steady, as though waiting for him to notice it. When he reached out, the familiar pull of a vision engulfed him, and the expanse dissolved into a new scene. He found himself standing in the center of a vast, domed chamber, its walls adorned with intricate carvings that seemed to shimmer faintly in the dim light. At the far end of the room, a group of individuals stood around a large circular table. The air was heavy with tension, their voices low but urgent as they exchanged heated words. David recognized some of the faces, leaders from different parts of the world, their influence vast and far-reaching. "This is where power converges," the voice returned, calm and resonant. "These are the decision-makers, the architects of policy and strategy. But not all their intentions are as they appear." David stepped closer, drawn to the intensity of their discussion. One of the leaders, a tall woman with a sharp, commanding presence, spoke with authority. "We must act swiftly. If the public discovers the full scope of our operations, the backlash will be uncontrollable." A man across from her nodded solemnly. "Agreed. The narrative must remain tightly controlled. Misdirection is key." David's stomach twisted as he listened. He thought of the countless people who placed their trust in these individuals, unaware of the calculated decisions being made behind closed doors. As the discussion continued, he noticed how their threads of light interacted. Each leader's thread glowed brightly at the center but was entwined with darker strands that extended outward, their shadows touching the threads of others. The darkness didn't completely obscure their light, but it tainted their connections, spreading doubt and distrust. "Their power is immense," David said aloud. "But it's corrupted, tangled in shadows. How can the web survive when so much of it is influenced by this?" "The web endures because it is not solely shaped by the powerful," the voice replied. "Their influence is significant, but the light of countless other threads can counterbalance their shadows." As David watched, the vision shifted, focusing on one of the leaders, a man whose thread flickered weakly, as though it were struggling against the darkness surrounding it. He appeared hesitant, his gaze darting nervously between his colleagues. David could sense the internal conflict within him, the pull between his conscience and the pressure to conform. The vision followed the man as he left the chamber, his thread dim but intact. David saw him alone in his office, staring at a folder on his desk. Inside were documents that revealed the extent of the decisions being made, the manipulation and deception that underpinned them. The man's hands trembled as he flipped through the pages, his thread flickering as he wrestled with the weight of his choices. Even among the powerful, there are those who struggle against the shadows, the voice said. Their threads, though strained, can still strengthen the web. The man's vision shifted, showing what might have been. This time, he stood before a microphone at a press conference, revealing the truth to the world. His thread brightened, its light spreading outward as the revelation sparked change. Though the path was fraught with challenges, the ripple effect of his courage touched countless lives, inspiring others to seek truth and demand accountability. David felt a flicker of hope as the vision faded. He understood now that even in the darkest corners of power, there was the potential for light to emerge. But it required bravery, a willingness to face the consequences of breaking from the shadows. The threads around him shimmered again, drawing his attention to another. This one glowed more brightly, its light vibrant and dynamic. When he touched it, he was pulled into a bustling market square. The air was alive with the sounds of vendors calling out, children laughing, and the hum of conversations. The scene was filled with energy, the connections between people visible as glowing threads that wove through the space. This is the heart of the web, the voice said. The everyday lives of individuals, the choices they make, the relationships they build. These threads are the foundation upon which the web is woven. David watched as a woman at a stall handed a loaf of bread to a young boy, her thread glowing warmly as she smiled at him. The boy's thread pulsed brightly, the light spreading to his parents waiting nearby. The ripple effect extended outward, touching others in the square and creating a cascade of warmth and connection. This is the strength of the web, the voice continued. The light of one thread can illuminate many. The collective actions of individuals create a resilience that even the shadows cannot fully extinguish. David turned his attention to a man standing at the edge of the square. His thread was dim, weighed down by shadows that seemed to cling to him like a heavy fog. He stood silently, his shoulders slumped, as though disconnected from the vibrancy around him. David felt a pang of sorrow as he watched, sensing the isolation and despair that had dimmed the man's light. How can his thread be strengthened? David asked, his voice filled with concern. Through connection, the voice replied. A single act of kindness, a gesture of understanding, can reignite the light within even the dimmest thread. The vision followed as a young girl approached the man, offering him a small flower she had picked. The man's thread flickered faintly, then began to glow brighter as he accepted the flower with a trembling hand. The light from his thread spread outward, touching those around him and creating a ripple of connection that strengthened the web. As the vision faded, David found himself back in the shimmering expanse, the threads around him pulsing with renewed energy. He thought of the leaders in the chamber, the man in the square, and the countless others whose lives contributed to the web. He understood now that the power to shape the web didn't belong solely to those at the top. It was woven by every individual, every choice, every act of love or indifference. The web is fragile but resilient, the voice said. It is shaped by all who are connected to it. The light of a single thread, no matter how small, can create ripples that strengthen the whole. David felt a deep sense of clarity as he took another step forward. The threads around him seemed to hum in agreement, their light guiding him toward the next part of his journey. He didn't know what truths awaited him, but he was ready to face them, determined to carry the lessons he had learned into whatever came next. David stood in the shimmering expanse, the threads weaving their intricate patterns around him. The light from each thread pulsed in harmony, forming a symphony of connection that resonated deeply within him. He had seen the web's fragility, its resilience, and the power of individual choices to shape its structure. But as he gazed at the vast network stretching endlessly before him, he sensed there was more to uncover, more truths hidden within the fabric of existence. Another thread caught his eye, its glow uneven and surrounded by faint shadows. When he touched it, a vision enveloped him, pulling him into a new scene. He was in a cold, sterile laboratory, the air thick with the hum of machinery and the faint scent of chemicals. Scientists in white coats moved purposefully between rows of glowing monitors and sleek equipment. At the center of the room stood a glass enclosure, inside which was a complex machine radiating an ominous energy. It pulsed with a steady rhythm, its vibrations seemingly resonating with the threads David could see connecting to it. "This is innovation at the edge," the voice explained, its tone calm but weighted. "Here, advancements are made that could transform the web for better or for worse." David watched as the scientists gathered around the machine, their expressions a mixture of awe and unease. One of them, a man with tired eyes and a trembling hand, adjusted a series of dials. The machine's hum grew louder, its energy intensifying until the threads connected to it began to vibrate violently. The other scientists exchanged nervous glances but said nothing, their silence complicit as the machine's power grew. David noticed how the shadows around the machine spread outward, creeping along the threads that connected it to the web. He could feel the tension in the air, the sense that something irreversible was being unleashed. "What are they doing?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. "They are pushing boundaries without understanding the consequences," the voice replied. "The pursuit of progress is not inherently wrong, but when it is driven by greed or fear, it risks unraveling the web." The vision shifted, showing the ripple effects of the machine's activation. Communities were disrupted as the technology it created was weaponized, its power concentrated in the hands of a few. The shadows spread quickly, dimming the threads of those affected and creating fractures in the web. David felt a deep unease as he watched. "Why do they continue, knowing the damage they're causing?" he asked. "Because they are disconnected from the web," the voice said. "Their focus is narrow, their vision confined to immediate gains. They do not see the broader impact of their actions." The scene changed again, showing an alternate path. This time, the scientist with the trembling hand stepped forward, his voice steady as he addressed his colleagues. He spoke of the dangers they were courting, of the responsibility they had to ensure their work served the greater good. His thread brightened as he spoke, and the ripple effect of his courage began to shift the atmosphere in the room. The machine's energy was redirected, its potential harnessed for purposes that strengthened the web rather than weakening it. David felt a flicker of hope as the vision faded. He understood now that even in the most isolated spaces, where power and knowledge seemed concentrated, individual choices could steer the course of progress. The web was not immutable. It could be shaped by the intentions and actions of those connected to it. The threads around him pulsed again, drawing his attention to another. This one glowed brightly but was tangled with others, its light struggling to spread. When he touched it, he was pulled into a crowded urban street. The air buzzed with the energy of the city, the cacophony of honking cars, hurried footsteps, and snippets of conversation creating a lively backdrop. David noticed a man standing at the edge of the sidewalk, his thread vibrant but tangled with those around him. The man held a clipboard, his voice carrying over the noise as he spoke passionately about an issue that clearly mattered deeply to him. Some passers-by stopped to listen, their threads pulsing faintly in response, but many ignored him, their light flickering as they walked past. "This is the thread of advocacy," the voice said. "The light of those who speak for others, who seek to illuminate the shadows cast by apathy and ignorance." David watched as the man continued to speak, his determination unwavering despite the indifference of the crowd. He saw how the man's thread reached out, touching those who stopped to listen, their light growing brighter as they engaged with his message. The ripple effect spread gradually, each new connection strengthening the web. The vision shifted, showing what might have been. This time, more people stopped to listen, their threads intertwining with the man's as they joined his cause. The energy of the street transformed, the collective light of the crowd pushing back against the shadows that had loomed over the city. The web grew stronger, its connections more vibrant and resilient. David felt a swell of admiration as the vision faded. He thought of the countless individuals who worked tirelessly to bring about change, often in the face of indifference or resistance. Their threads, though small on their own, had the power to create ripples that reached far beyond what they could see. The threads around him shimmered again, forming a new pattern that drew his focus. He found himself in a quiet room, the walls lined with bookshelves filled with worn volumes and faded photographs. An elderly woman sat at a desk, her hands gently tracing the pages of a journal. Her thread glowed brightly, its light steady and warm, and David could see how it extended outward, touching the threads of others in distant places. "This is the thread of wisdom," the voice said. "The light of those who preserve the stories and knowledge that bind the web together." David watched as the woman wrote in her journal, her words carrying the weight of experience and understanding. She paused occasionally to reflect, her gaze distant as though seen beyond the confines of the room. Her thread pulsed faintly, the light spreading as her work connected to those who would one day read her words. The vision followed the ripple effect of her actions, showing how her wisdom inspired others to reflect on their own lives, to seek deeper connections and understanding. The light of her thread strengthened the web, creating ripples that reached across generations. David felt a sense of reverence as the vision faded. He thought of the stories and lessons that shaped his own life, the threads of wisdom that had guided him through moments of doubt and uncertainty. He understood now that the web was not just a network of connections but a repository of collective knowledge and experience. As the threads around him pulsed brighter, David felt a renewed sense of purpose. He thought of the scientists, the advocates, and the keepers of wisdom, and how their threads contributed to the strength and resilience of the web. He understood now that every thread, no matter how small or isolated, had the power to shape the whole. The voice returned, its tone steady and calm. "The web is alive, David. It is shaped by every choice, every connection, every act of love or courage. You have seen the forces that threaten it, but you have also seen the light that sustains it. The power to strengthen the web lies within each thread." David nodded, his resolve deepening. He didn't know what truths awaited him next, but he was ready to face them, determined to carry the lessons he had learned into every corner of the web. As the threads guided him forward, their light seemed to hum in harmony with his own, urging him to continue his journey. David moved deeper into the shimmering expanse, the threads weaving intricate patterns around him, their light pulsing with a steady rhythm that felt almost like a heartbeat. The vast web stretched infinitely, its glow illuminating truths he had only begun to grasp. Each thread told a story, and every connection revealed the impact of choices, big and small, on the intricate tapestry of existence. The voice that had guided him seemed quieter now, its presence fading into the background as if encouraging him to explore and interpret the web on his own. Another thread caught his attention. It was brighter than the others, its glow vibrant yet interwoven with darker strands that dulled its light. When David touched it, the vision that unfolded was strikingly different from the ones he had seen before. He found himself in the midst of a lavish gala, the kind of event that radiated wealth and exclusivity. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over the room, their glow reflecting off polished floors and glittering jewelry. Guests in expensive attire moved through the space, their laughter and conversation filling the air. But as David observed, he noticed something beneath the surface, a tension that belied the opulence. The threads of the people in the room pulsed faintly, their light steady but entangled with shadows that spread from the edges of the space. "This is the seat of influence," the voice said, returning briefly. "A place where wealth and power converge, shaping decisions that ripple through the web." David watched as a man at the center of the room raised a glass, his voice commanding as he addressed the crowd. "We stand here tonight as stewards of progress," he said, his tone polished and confident. "Our investments, our decisions, drive the future. Let us continue to lead with strength and vision." The crowd applauded, their threads glowing faintly as they responded to the man's words. But David saw beyond the applause. He saw how the man's thread, though bright, was knotted with darker strands. These shadows extended outward, touching the threads of those around him and spreading subtly through the room. The ripple effect was faint but persistent, a quiet erosion of trust and connection. David moved closer, focusing on the man's thread. He saw the decisions that had led to its entanglement, choices made in pursuit of power, actions that prioritized profit over people. The vision followed these choices outward, showing their impact on communities far removed from the glitz of the gala. Factories closed, jobs vanished, and lives were disrupted as the ripple effects of the man's influence spread. "This is the cost of disconnection," the voice said softly. "When decisions are made without regard for the web, the shadows spread." David felt a pang of frustration as he watched. He thought of the countless lives affected by the choices of those in the room, people who would never set foot in such a space but whose futures were shaped by the decisions made there. "How can this be stopped?" he asked, his voice tinged with urgency. "How can the web survive when so much power is concentrated in the hands of so few?" "The web endures because it is not controlled by a single thread," the voice replied. "The light of many can counterbalance the shadows of the few. But it requires action, connection, and the willingness to see beyond oneself." The vision shifted, showing what could have been. This time, the man at the center of the room spoke differently. He acknowledged the cost of his decisions, the lives affected by the pursuit of power. His thread began to glow brighter, the shadows receding as he chose to redirect his influence towards strengthening the web. The ripple effect was immediate, the threads of those in the room growing more vibrant as they responded to his example. The light spread outward, touching the lives of those far beyond the gala, creating ripples of hope and connection. As the vision faded, David felt a sense of possibility. He understood now that even in the most exclusive spaces, where power seemed untouchable, the potential for change existed. It required courage, humility, and the willingness to confront the shadows within oneself. The threads around him pulsed again, drawing his attention to another. This one was faint but steady, its light surrounded by a soft halo that seemed to invite him closer. When he touched it, the vision that emerged was simpler but no less profound. He was in a small village, the air filled with the scent of wood smoke and the sound of laughter. Children played in the dusty streets, their threads glowing brightly as they chased one another with carefree abandon. At the center of the village stood a group of elders, their faces weathered but kind, their threads radiating a steady warmth that seemed to anchor the entire community. "These are the weavers," the voice said, its tone gentle. "Those who strengthen the web through connection, wisdom, and care." David watched as the elders guided the villagers in building a new well. The task was shared among them, each person contributing their time and effort. The threads of the villagers glowed brightly, weaving together into a vibrant pattern that spread outward, touching the threads of neighboring communities. "This is the strength of the web," the voice continued. "Connection creates resilience. When individuals come together, their light can dispel even the deepest shadows." David felt a deep sense of peace as he observed the scene. The actions of the villagers were small but impactful, their collective efforts creating ripples that strengthened the web far beyond their own lives. He thought of the threads he had seen in the gala, tangled with shadows, and realized how different the energy was here. The villagers' threads were vibrant and harmonious, their light a testament to the power of unity and intention. The vision shifted again, pulling David into a new scene. He was standing in a dimly lit room, its walls lined with shelves of books and documents. A single figure sat at a desk, their thread glowing faintly as they pored over pages of information. David could see the weight of their work, the way their light flickered as they struggled to uncover the truth hidden within the documents. "This is the seeker," the voice said, "the one who searches for truth, who shines light into the shadows." David watched as the figure pieced together fragments of information, their thread growing brighter with each discovery. The vision followed their journey as they shared their findings, connecting with others who carried their own threads of light. Together, their efforts illuminated the web, exposing the shadows and creating space for healing and growth. Ahead of him, the threads began to converge, forming a dense cluster of glowing light. It pulsed with an intensity unlike anything David had seen before, radiating waves of warmth and energy. As he stepped closer, the voice that had guided him returned, calm and steady. "You stand at the nexus where all threads meet," the voice said. "This is the heart of the web, the source of its strength and its vulnerability." David gazed at the nexus, mesmerized by its beauty. The threads that formed it were vibrant and interconnected, each one contributing to the light that illuminated the expanse. But as he looked closer, he saw the shadows that lingered at its edges, creeping inward, threatening to unravel the delicate balance. "How can this be protected?" David asked. "How can the shadows be kept from overtaking the light?" "The web is sustained by the choices of those connected to it," the voice replied. "Every act of love, every moment of courage, strengthens the nexus. But the shadows are never fully gone. They are born of fear, greed, and disconnection. To protect the light, one must confront the shadows within themselves." David felt the weight of the words settle over him. He thought of the leaders driven by power, the villagers united by purpose, the seekers uncovering truths, and the countless lives he had witnessed in the web. He realized that every thread had the potential for both light and shadow, and that the strength of the web depended on the willingness of each individual to choose connection over division. "What can I do?" David asked, his voice filled with both determination and vulnerability. "You are a thread in the web," the voice said. "Your choices matter. The light you carry can inspire others, creating ripples that extend far beyond what you can see. To act with intention, to choose love and understanding, is to strengthen the web." The threads around him began to pulse in harmony, their light intensifying as if responding to his resolve. David felt a deep sense of clarity and purpose. He understood now that the web was not something external, something distant. It was a reflection of the world he had lived in, a tapestry woven by the connections and choices of every life. As the light of the nexus grew brighter, David felt himself being pulled away, the expanse dissolving into a warm, golden glow. He opened his eyes to find himself lying in a hospital bed, the hum of machines filling the room. His body ached, but his mind was clear, his heart filled with a profound sense of peace. His family stood around him, their faces etched with relief and love. David reached out to take their hands, feeling the strength of their connection, the light that flowed between them. He knew now that every moment with them was an opportunity to strengthen the web, to choose love and kindness over fear and indifference. In the days that followed, David shared his experience with those around him, speaking of the web and the power of connection. His words inspired others to reflect on their own choices, to seek ways to strengthen the threads of their lives. He understood that his journey was not an ending but a beginning, a call to live with intention, to weave light into the tapestry of existence. The web was vast, and its challenges were many. But David knew that its strength lay in the connections within it, and he was determined to do his part to keep the light shining.